Welcome back, Clarions. Heavy metal is a $10 million industry. And yes, let's say that again, heavy metal. The genre your parents told you to turn down, the music that Tipper Gore and the PMRC tried to regulate in 1985, saying that you're all devil worshippers. It's a scene that gets dismissed as fringe subculture by people that have never even been exposed to it or been to a metal show. $10 billion. And that's our conservative floor estimate. The real number is probably higher, and I'm going to show you the math. But more importantly, what I'm going to do is show you what that number means for cities, because this is not a music story. This is an economic development story that happens to involve music and happens to involve heavy metal. So let's start with the sort of 5 layers of the heavy metal economy. We're going to build it from the ground up. And layer 1 is what we all know. It's the recorded music. IFPI tracks global music revenue, and in 2025, globally, that was $29.6 billion. Metal consistently captures between 4.5 and 8% of that market. It depends on how you draw the genre boundary, but that puts metal's recorded music revenue around $1.3 to $2.3 billion annually, and that's just from the recordings. Now, layer 2, that's the live music, and this is where metal punches the hardest. Metallica's M72 World Tour grossed $476 million in 2 years. One band, one tour. Iron Maiden has generated over $1 billion in cumulative live revenue across their career. Wacken Open Air, a festival held in a German village of 1,800 people, draws 85,000 attendees and generates 50 million euros in regional economic impact over 4 days. We have a recent episode about Wacken and the infrastructure there. Across the full ecosystem of metal touring, I estimate live revenue between $900 and $1.5 billion annually, and that's conservative because it only counts the documented box office. It doesn't count the restaurants and the hotels and the gas stations and the parking lots and the other things that capture that secondary indirect spend and how that flows through the economy. Things we measure in our economic impact work with developers and cities around the country. The third of the 5 layers is merchandise and licensing. Now, this is a big one. Iron Maiden's Eddie is one of the most valuable mascots in all of music, in all of industry. They have that licensed across apparel and beer and video games and films. Trooper Beer alone has moved 35 million pints. And look at what they're doing now in partnering with Lagunitas, the craft brewery here in the States. Just that economic impact itself from Britain over here into the U.S. Global merchandise for the genre across all the bands lands between 500 million and 1 billion annually. Now, the 4th layer is music tourism and destination spending, something I've been doing a lot of recently, just personal. Anecdote there. This is the multiplier layer. When Wacken runs its festival, the 1.8 times the multiplier on direct spend turns 50 million euros at the box office and on site into 90 million euros in regional economic activity. And then take this math and you apply it to every major metal festival globally. Download in the UK, Hellfest in France, Loud Park in Japan, Louder Than Nightlife and Knotfest here in the US. When you aggregate the festival circus and start applying just standard tourism multipliers, you're looking at 700 million and up to $1.6 billion in just destination economic impact. And then you have layer 5. The supply chain, production crews and lighting technicians and tour bus operators and sound engineers and merchandise manufacturers and t-shirt printers. And you've got the independent labels and the recording and rehearsal studios. All of the people who make heavy metal happen. Conservatively, this is between $2 and $4 billion in economic activity. You add those together and you're at 5.4 billion on the low end, 10.4 billion on the high end. We've got a full report that we'll be providing a link to, and we've documented this conservative sourced estimate for heavy metal's annual global economic footprint. That number not count. So this is where it gets interesting for economic development and for cities. The informal economy of metal is massive and invisible. We always talk here, one of the things we talk a lot about is finding hidden assets. But think about every independent metal show that happens on a Friday night in a city somewhere. Here in Miami, my band played Sunday night at Churchill's, local, the CBG of the South here. That's one of our institutions. But when that happens, the bar might double its revenue. The food truck outside sees additional revenue. The merchandise tables, the parking lot down the street, the Uber drivers. the after show diner that fills up at 1 a.m. None of that is captured in that $10 billion number. It's too distributed and too informal. It's too invisible for our traditional economic measurement tools. But I know this because I ran the data. Last Saturday, February 21st, the Brewtality Metal Festival, Lincoln's Beard Brewing Company, Southwest Miami, out in the suburbs here, 14 bands, 2 stages, $10 at the door. My band played the outside main stage at 9:30 at night. I looked out at the crowd. That represents economic impact, that represents spending. 837 people showed up to this festival. Local metal festival. Average household income is $99,000. Median income is $74,000. 39% of those who came from areas where 39% earn over $100,000 a year. Their average dwell time there was 148 minutes. They came and they stayed. This was a destination. It was a place they wanted to be, how we define economic development, places people want to be. One of New York City's Manhattan zip codes ranked 9th in all of the origin locations for this festival. See, that is just one show, one night, one neighborhood brewery, and us using the methodologies we do in street economics and businessflare every day in our Placer, AI, and our other tools to analyze and understand what's happening at a local and hyper-local level. The businesses on Bird Road have no idea why their Friday night outperformed. The gas stations on 72nd Street don't know who these customers were or where they came from. The Coral Gables bar, where they showed up in post-visit behavior data, got a secondary spin and did not know that it was delivered by heavy metal. Now take that and multiply that by every independent metal show happening every weekend in every city. The informal economy of heavy metal is at a minimum $1 to $3 billion annual undercount. We can back this up. The will to pull this sort of thing doesn't exist in traditional economic development circles, at least not yet. Music Cities is here to change that. That's why it is the most subscribed economic development channel on YouTube. Followed in a distant second, most subscribed, our own street economics channel, where we pull and actually do the data analysis. Now let's talk about production and intellectual property. This is the frame that makes it really matter for cities the most. You see, there's a difference between the production economy and a consumption economy, and we talked about this in one of our episodes back in December. A consumption economy, that's cover bands, it's service workers, it's franchises, it's people who trade hours for dollars, but no intellectual property is created. Nothing's exported. The city's going to generate service sector jobs, and then it's going to congratulate itself for creating jobs. But a production economy, that is original bands, that is intellectual property creation. That is recording engineers and producers and managers, music loggers, merchandise operations, and manufacturing. Things that can be exported beyond the city limits. Again, you don't become a music city with cover bands. The clearest case study for this in heavy metal history is Tampa, Florida. You heard me talk about it before, and we have a specific dedicated episode coming up soon on this subject. Late 1980s. Bands like Death and Morbid Angel and Obituary and Deicide and Cannibal Corpse were developing in a studio called Morrisound. A producer named Scott Burns created a signature sound, heavy, precise, and brutal, and they called it the Florida Sound. Now, nobody in Tampa's Economic Development Office knew this was happening. No city initiative supported the manufacturing of death metal in Tampa. There's not a grant that came along and funded, and there's not a consultant who got paid to facilitate. It grew the way the best things in economic development always grow, always seeded in spite of the city, against the city's will, or without the city's knowledge. But what did it produce? It produced a global export economy. It is one of the best examples about building local and growing global that you have. Swedish bands came to Tampa to record. Norwegian bands came to Tampa to record. Brazilian bands made the trip because that's where the expertise and the talent was. Tampa became the production cluster for an entire global genre of music that then spawned all of these subgenres all around the world when these bands went back together. Norwegian black metal, Swedish melodic death metal. And those economic benefits of that reputation have lasted for decades in Tampa and spread globally. So that is a production economy, not a fast food franchise. That's original intellectual property, original IP. It's an exported product. It's replicable expertise. It's a city that became the acknowledged center of a global industry without ever trying to be, and the city not even knowing until much later. Wacken is the same story, but at the festival scale. Two metal fans in a German village of 1800, they started a festival in 1990 out in the field. Not planned by the tourism board. Two guys with a vision and a no permission attitude built something that now draws 85,000 people annually. It generates 50 million euros in economic impact in one of the smallest municipalities in Germany. The city of Wacken did not make the festival. The festival made Wacken. Now, what do cities get wrong here? Most cities that try to become music cities make the same mistake. They try to program culture on their own terms instead of create the conditions for it. We did a short about this not too long ago about what they're trying to do in Miami Beach. They want to be a music city again, but on whose terms is that going to happen? I doubt on that. Build a music district with the wrong bands. They fund a showcase that books the wrong artists. They create an incubator that attracts the wrong tenants. They run a strategic plan process, takes 2 years, costs $200,000, and produces a document that describes what they wish they already had. Meanwhile, actual music scene is happening somewhere else. It's happening in someone's garage. It's happening on a bar on the edge of downtown that doesn't show up on the glossy tourist maps. It's happening in a brewery parking lot in the suburbs where 837 people show up on a Saturday night because 14 bands earned their attendance and attention. The metric that matters is not how many music venues your city has. It's whether those venues have original bands or cover bands. That single distinction tells you whether you have a production economy or a consumption economy, whether you're building something exportable or just generating service sector nights, recycling money, trading hours for dollars. Economic developers love to count inputs and square footage of venue space and number of music businesses, percentage of arts employment. These are consumption metrics. They measure what you have. They do not measure what you're producing. The production economy metric is different. How many bands for have been booked outside of your city? Our friends in Livekill are about to leave Florida out on a tour. How many albums produced here have been sold outside of your market? Are carried in record stores in the Northeast and in other regions of the country? How many people traveled to your city specifically because of your music scene, like those who we know came from 10016 zip code in Manhattan for our festival last Saturday? That's the Wacken question. That's the Tampa question. It's the brewtality question. That top 10 zip code. So my actual argument that I'm making here, let's just be direct about that. Heavy metal is not just a niche subculture that happens to generate some economic activity on the side. It is a minimum, it is a $10 billion global industry with documented, measurable economic footprint that most economic developers in cities have never thought about because they wrote it off based on preconceived ideas of what it is before ever thinking about the math. The mistake is not just cultural bias, though, even though that's really real. It's more methodology. It's more methodological. Traditional economic development tools were not designed for the informal economy of live music. Placer AI can show you that 837 people with $99,000 average income staying 140 minutes at a $10 metal show in the suburbs existed. The will to look at it has been missing. Nico McBrain, the longtime drummer of Iron Maiden, has a barbecue restaurant in Coral Springs up in Broward County. Celebrated his 16th anniversary back in December. We put Placer on it. 1,400 people showed up to that parking lot for that celebration. It's not going to show up in anything that cities and economic developers traditionally measure. But this can change when you decide that cultural infrastructure is infrastructure. It's not culture and arts over here and economic development over here. It is economic infrastructure. It's not a metaphor for it. It's not a subversion of it. It is actual infrastructure that generates actual economic activity. And it flows into our real neighborhoods. A venue you see is a pipe. And music is the power that's flowing through. Heavy metal is the power that's flowing through that. The most tribal, connected genre, the genre of music with the most belonging that people will travel for, that people plan their lives around, that people pass down through generation to generation. It's not fleeting the way that pop and other genres are. The bands that draw the audience are the source, and it stays with you for life. The cities that understand this will build for it. The metal that built Gen X is the same metal that's building Gen Z. And those of us Gen Xers in the scene are trying to do what we can to set the table for those awesome Gen Z metal bands who were also performing at Brutality last Saturday night. Well, something's going to happen in your neighborhoods that you're not going to understand. You might show up 3 years later and then you can take the credit for it. You see, the next music cities are already building. Right now, there's a scene somewhere in a city, and the city doesn't know it has that scene. The economic developers in that city have no idea it's there, but the bands know and the venues know. The tribe knows. Eventually, the data will know. It's just a question of City Hall will ever decide to look. So this is the impact of heavy metal. $10 billion annually, conservatively, with a $1 to $3 billion informal economy undercount, built on production economies in cities that never asked for it, never looked for it, probably never won. Documented neighborhoods where the city had nothing to do with it, but it grew. The type of organic growth that is real. That is economic development, and that is the music cities. Let's do it. See ya.